you. As promised, Mr. Khan, a response to Mr. Kenny from earlier.
And I want to echo those sentiments. As a modern conservatives acknowledge that climate change is real. And when Don McIntyre is Mr. Kenny's environment minister, we know what Albertans are going to think about that. And there's no way that that type of approach is going to win the confidence of Albertans. And again, I'll come back to Mr. Kenny and your newfound faith in the Progressive Conservative Party. After 20 years in Ottawa, you're really good at telling people what they want to hear, but there's no way that you can sincerely stand in front of this room and tell people that you were supporting the Progressive Conservative Party in 2012 or 2015 and you weren't helping the West.
Mr. Kennedy. The way I can do so is if you talk to our leader, Rick McIver, who I have openly, publicly, and proudly supported in his elections as a Progressive Conservative. Mr. Khan, I understand you're desperate and you want to make a tax, but try. I think Albertans expect us to focus our fire on the NDP that is wrecking this province. I think we should adopt Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment to speak no ill of another conservative. And I think you should speak to our leader about my support for him as a Progressive Conservative. You know, if you want to make a tax, that's fine, but try to make them factual.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I was going to wrap it up there, but that was, Mr. Khan, I'm sure we'd like to hear 30 seconds from you. Well, we can go back and forth?
Sure.
No, we won't go back and forth. This will end this question.
Thank you.
So the guy who starts the fight gets to finish it.
I don't think there's anything constructive to be held by bickering about how much of a Progressive Conservative Mr. Kenny is, because I think those in the room know exactly where he stands in terms of our Progressive Conservative values and who we are. And I take umbrage, sir, to you questioning my belief and faith in being an Albertan and standing up for this province.
Not for a moment.
You just said you did.
Check the record.
Move on.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. And Mr. Kenny, you start the next round, so this is questions about the Edmonton economy, specifically Edmonton. In the mid-1990s, a large budget deficit was addressed with significant cuts to social services. That had a considerable and disproportionate effect on the Edmonton economy. Everyone agrees the current economic climate needs to be addressed. How do you plan on tackling our current deficit? And with us being in Edmonton, how do you plan to ensure Edmontonians don't once again bear the brunt of cuts?
So, as we know, Alberta spends more than any jurisdiction, any province in Canada, on a per capita basis, more than any subnational jurisdiction in North America. We spend about 20% more per person than the average amongst Canadian provinces, and 25% more than our closest and most relevant comparator, British Columbia, under a Liberal government that delivers broadly the same set of services at roughly the same quality, and we're doing it for 25% more. There's something wrong there. If we were delivering the same services at the same price as the Liberal government of British Columbia, we'd be spending about $11 billion less. Now, I'm not suggesting we can cut $11 billion out of the provincial budget, but what we can do is to begin to emulate the same cost structure of other provinces. And of course, to do so in a way that is prudent, that doesn't affect the quality of frontline services, and doesn't disproportionately impact any particular community in the province. But at the end of the day, it's fine to say that we're fiscally conservative, but we're going to have to demonstrate that if we're back in office through some difficult decisions. I led two multi-billion-dollar federal departments and cut 10% of operational spending without any controversy or contention. It's difficult work, but it can be done. We've done it before. We can do it again here in Alberta.
Dr. Starkey.
Well, thank you. Well, certainly one of the things that raises a lot of concern when I travel around the province is the budgetary deficit. And the numbers are indeed stark. We have an $11 billion budgetary deficit this year alone, and we will have a $60 billion debt by the time this NDP government leaves office in 2019. But the problem is you can't just say, well, we'll go back to doing things the way Ralph Klein did. Because Ralph Klein's solution were great in the 90s, but today we're in a different Alberta. And we have to recognize that. And if you try today to sell Ralph Klein's type of fiscal restraint and conservatism to Albertans today, they won't buy it this time around. because we have to do things like do proper repairs and maintenance on our infrastructure so that we have hospitals and schools and roads that are in good repair and we don't have to do catch-up on all of those things. I would like to know, for example, if we have 2 major hospitals in Edmonton that because of deferred maintenance are simply not in the condition they should be, both the Misericordia and the Royal Allied. What is the legacy of our government from the last round of cuts? It's the blowing up of the Calgary General Hospital. Do we want that to happen? No, we don't. We have to be very clear and commit to the maintenance of proper social services, not just in Edmonton, but right throughout the province. Because that, in fact, is, again, a quality of life issue. Albertans may well come here to make a living, but they stay and thrive to make a life. And I come back to that again and again. It's critical, not just for the city of Edmonton, but for the entire province.
Thank you, Dr. Charlie. Mr. Khan?
Thank you. When it comes to our massive deficits and this growing hole that the NDP is taking for us, we absolutely have to be able to be in a position to dig our way out. And that means these gigantic operational deficits, spending for our province's operations absolutely has to stop. And we can do this by building a more effective, efficient government. And what I would do is examine every line of our government business with the question, do we have to be in that line of business? And the best example of this is many years ago, and through PC leadership, we got out of the business of selling liquor in Alberta. We closed down the ALCB stores, and in doing so, we made government smaller, more effective, but we also created an enormous industry, thousands of jobs, better selection, better choice for Albertans. We need to get back to a stable environment where we're not cancelling our partners' contracts and increasing investors' confidence in this province. But this question specifically is about Edmonton and Alberta, and as somebody who built a small local software company to a company that sold and produced student records around Canada, around North America, and through the world. I know when you listen to Brad Ferguson from Edmonton Economic Development, he talks about this incredible, vibrant entrepreneurial spirit here in Edmonton. But the biggest challenge being our entrepreneurs selling their products outside of the local market. I have that expertise. I have had a successful business, and that's the kind of expertise and knowledge I will bring to my style of leadership to help Edmonton dig itself out of the hole.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I take it into question that we understand that Alberta has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And we've used that phrase throughout the years that I've been a member of the PCs, but we have to understand that. The answer to the question is not to increase taxes, not to increase an ever-increasing burden on all of us. I'm a business owner in Calgary. It's pretty awful. But starting from that, I think as Conservatives, we're all going to agree on creating efficiencies. And in 90 seconds, I won't go through all the different efficiencies we can find in health. And direct you to my website, byronforalberta.ca. It talks about a lot of that. But we can easily compare this to our household, or if we're business owners, to our business. You don't reduce spending by making massive cuts in 2017. You go through your line items in your household or your business, and you make cuts where you can, little bit by little bit. That's what we have to do. I'm not a big believer that the provincial government anytime in the past number of years has been a real good spender of my money or your money. And frankly, I'm not real convinced that the federal government has been a very good spender of your money and my money, and longer than the last year and a bit. Frankly, we haven't been real good, and I'm a member of the Conservative Party. But that's why, if we can take a lesson from what happened in the U.S., as awful as some of that mess was, we can remember that there is a thirst to bring people into government who aren't stuck in government, who don't stand up and talk about lessons they learned while in government. Bring in fresh people, business people, and let's get business people and real people, like everybody in this room, determining the future of the economy of Alberta. That's what's going to work, not repeating the past. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I'll give any of the candidates 30 seconds if they want to talk about Edmonton and the economy specifically. Dr. Starkey, 30 seconds to you.
Well, one of the things that I think we need to talk about in Edmonton is what are Edmonton's strengths and how can Edmonton become that knowledge and innovation leader. And in fact, Mayor Iveson has called making Edmonton the city of health innovation. I would suggest that that is a great goal, and that is something that the world will need, not only things like the Edmonton Protocol for treating diabetes, but a variety of other research that is done in our province that can benefit the entire planet. That is an area that Edmonton can innovate, can diversify, bring in things like biotechnology, medical research, medical devices. That is a huge area of potential growth for our economy.
Would anyone like Mr. Kenny?
I agree entirely with Richard, and obviously the University of Alberta and the entire ecosystem of medical research that's grown up around it is a tremendous strength. And something I've commented on before that I think would be a tremendous strength for Edmonton would be to really build hypercharge the sort of ecosystem for startup enterprises, especially in information technology, by using the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program to attract high-flying people who want to start new businesses. But finally, let's not forget, when we talk about the bright, shiny objects in the new economy, let's not forget about the industrial base of this city, which is right now struggling. On the peripheries of this city, that is what is one of the main drivers of growth, and we need investor confidence back in the oil and gas industry to keep that going.
Mr. Tom, 30 seconds.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything about this, but since Mr. Kenny is the one who brought it up, you know, we look in recent history here in Alberta at our economy and some of the labor challenges that we've had, particularly with temporary foreign worker program. When my constituents and people around the province needed desperately labor from hard-working new Canadians. And Mr. Kenny unfortunately chose votes in Quebec over doing what was best for Edmonton business, for business around the province. And I just want to come back to the fact that this needs to be about what's best for Edmonton, what's best for Alberta, and what's best for the Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta.
Mr. Kenny?
So, in the first 6 years, let's see what's happening here. In the first 6 years of the Harper Conservative government, which by the way, on average won 2/3 of the votes of Albertans and all but won seats in 3 or 4 elections, we quadrupled the number, we allowed the number of temporary foreign workers coming to Alberta to quadruple. Until we saw significant abuse and distortions in the labor market when wage rates were being frozen in industries with increasing dependence on that industry, and young Albertans not getting jobs in entry-level positions. And so we decided we needed a balance. Yes, we wanted to provide access on a limited basis to the foreign worker program as a last and limited resort, but we also wanted to ensure that young Albertans could get their entry-level jobs as well.
We will move on to the next question, and this question has to do with healthcare. Healthcare is almost 50% of the provincial budget, and there are major infrastructure needs. As Dr. Starkey alluded to earlier, this includes the Royal Alexandra Hospital and the Misericordia Hospital in Edmonton. How do you plan to bend the cost curve on spending while providing a healthcare system that is effective and sustainable? And Dr. Starkey, the first question goes to you first.
Well, thank you. Obviously, this is something that I have a great deal of passion about. There are 3 main drivers that are driving our healthcare costs greater than the rate of inflation and population growth, and they are facilities, doctors, and pharmaceuticals. If we're going to bend the cost curve, we have to look at that, but more than that, it is talking about reducing the overall burden. Now, you're all sick of hearing that I'm a veterinarian, but I am. And I spend 80% of my time in practice doing preventive medicine because it is cheaper and more effective to keep animals from getting sick in the first place than treating them after they get sick. And that is part of the issue that we have. That is part of the struggle we have. We have a fantastic acute care system. We have skilled doctors, nurses. They work in some of the best facilities in the world. We have medical researchers whose research is pioneering developments in a whole range of things. But we're not working on reducing the overall number of people that end up in the hospital. We have an illness and injury response system, not a health care system. And, you know, I hate to say it, but the health minister in British Columbia is an old classmate of mine from vet school. And British Columbia has one of the highest performing health care systems in the nation. Now, I'm not saying treat people like animals. I don't want that on the front page of the journal. But I will say that our healthcare system could perform better if we shifted our focus to prevention, to public health, and to keeping people healthy instead of just treating them once they get sick.
Mr. Kong?
Thank you. Absolutely, I think we understand as Albertans that we have the highest per capita healthcare costs, and our system is performing about middle of the road. And as Richard talked about, it absolutely has to be about wellness initiatives in terms of keeping people out of the hospitals. As somebody who's from the sandwich generation, where I have a young family that I need to keep tabs on and raise, I also have in-laws who are having healthcare challenges. And what we know from this experience is we absolutely have to improve our home care. If we can have a strong, innovative home care system, we can keep our seniors in their homes for a longer, more sustainable period and improve the quality of their life. And while we're doing that, we're keeping them out of the hospital. We're keeping them out of expensive hospital beds. These are the kind of things that we need to do to bend that curve. And, call me, we have a veterinarian, I'm the software developer, I keep coming back to, my nerdy number data crunching. What we absolutely have to do is build an effective healthcare record that's electronic, that's easy to understand by the patient, that follows the patient, what that will do is transform our healthcare system, make it more efficient, make it more effective, and help patients be a part of their healthcare regime. And if we can do those things, we'll be able to afford that new hospital that we desperately need in the west end of Edmonton.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, how do you plan to bend the cost curve on spending while providing a healthcare system that is effective and sustainable?
Yeah, and I'm someone that doesn't particularly think badly of our healthcare system here in Alberta. I certainly had my parents go through using the healthcare systems, being a sandwich generation, just like Stephen indicated he is. I've had my children in the system. My son has had surgery some time ago at Stollery, and I'm very thrilled with the care they get. My parents' care in the Tom Baker Cancer Center in Calgary has been bar none. So what's important to me is at least preserving our current system and not losing it, which we're in danger of doing. We've got a $20 billion annual cost of Alberta Health. That's about a third higher than per capita than the average cost in Canada. These are not sustainable numbers. It's somewhat over 40% of every dollar the government spends is on health. So we're kidding ourselves, and with respect to my friends, if we think that just solely introducing wellness is going to solve the problem. And one example that I point to, which can be found on my website, byronforalberta.ca, is that when Alberta Health Services was created under a PC government, we had a Department of Health and Alberta Health Services. And there was immediate duplication of bureaucracy administration here in Edmonton that wasn't eliminated at that time, and to this day has not been eliminated. And the savings has been estimated as being significant if we simply got rid of the duplication. So I tell you, when my parents were at the Tom Baker Cancer Center in Calgary, when my son was at the Stollery here, we weren't getting treated and being smiled at and being served tea or popsicles by bureaucrats.
One of the reasons I'm here is because of my own personal family experience with our healthcare system. One of the most expensive in the world on a per capita basis, most expensive in Canada. My father went to an emergency room a few years ago at 9 o'clock at night, was registered, was put in a chair, and nobody saw him. No doctor, no nurse. He just sat there in a chair with an infection for 11 hours in an emergency room before a member of my family, I was away in Vancouver, another brother showed up and raised hell. Finally, he got somebody to see him and died a couple of hours later. Now, I cannot understand how that happens in a first world country with one of the most expensive healthcare systems in the world. And so when I look at the bang for the buck that we are putting in, it simply isn't adding up. And I think Byron is right. There is enormous waste of bureaucracy in this system. And I think we need to allow for more innovation and competition. Yes, of course, while maintaining the universality of our system. I think we Albertans deserve at least as much choice in our system as the people of Quebec have, for example. And so I think we need a government that has the courage to, yes, maintain a high-quality universal system, but to ensure that other families don't go through the experience like ours did.
I'm going to open this up to open forum. Dr. Starkey, would you like 30 seconds?
Well, I'd certainly be interested in hearing some more specifics. I mean, we can all stand and be critical of the number of dollars that are being spent in the system. But for example, doctors are 10% of the entire provincial budget. It is vital that we work towards moving more doctors into a situation where they're not on a fee-for-service basis, because that is one of the cost drivers. That's a specific thing that I would do as Premier, is work with the AMA to work in that direction. Now, I'd like to ask the other candidates and just throw it wide open. What specific things would you do to reduce overall healthcare costs, and where would they be targeted?
Okay. I'll let everyone answer that question, but we'll go in the order of the draw of this question. So Mr. Khan, then we'll go to Mr. Nelson, then Mr. Kenny. Mr. Khan, you're first.
Well, thank you. And you know, again, this comes back to progressive conservative values and who we are and how we build. And Richard talked earlier about the cost, the absolute cost of aging infrastructure, and particularly here in Alberta, with 2 aging hospitals that are not delivering the services to Edmontonians that we need, and adversely affecting our healthcare. We know that when there's floods at the Misericordia, it's costing everybody in this room. And those are expenses that are being incurred. And as progressive conservatives, we believe in building necessary infrastructure. And I ask you this question. If we're moving forward and we have Derek Fildebrandt as our Minister of Finance or Minister of Infrastructure, do you honestly believe that critical infrastructure is going to get built?
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, 30 seconds to respond to Mr. Dr. Starkey.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Starkey that I believe the number, and I'm tracking my brain for it, is that I think 50% of the health budget, slightly over, is actually directed towards doctors, nurses, and medication. Right? So you can't, assuming we don't want to play with that, you're left with the other 50% to deal with. And that's why in my earlier answer I talked specifically an area that would be able to get a substantial amount of savings. I'm talking about a substantial amount of savings just by eliminating duplication and administration of bureaucrats. And I don't care to lay people off. I've had to in my life, but that's what we're going to have to do. The good news is waiting times are going down, so we can focus on getting rid of bureaucrats and be happy.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Kenny?
Yeah, to pick up on Byron's point, what we've had is kind of a yo-yo in healthcare administration in this province, hyper-centralization and regionalization. And centralization, and every time accumulating new bureaucracies that never seem to be eliminated, and all the time discouraging innovation and competition within the public system that can be a pressure valve for costs. And so I think we should look at what's been done in British Columbia and Quebec in this respect, both of which provinces have more options while maintaining universality. That's a cost release for people who are prepared to pay a little bit more for medically unnecessary services outside of the Medicare system. That creates a space for somebody to move up the queue. And I think we need to be less dogmatic and more practical about the administration of the healthcare system.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question. And this one has to do with schools and education. There is an ongoing conversation in Alberta around parental rights. From choice in schools to resistance to mandated GSAs, how would you find a balance between the government ensuring children receive a high-quality education in a safe and welcoming environment, and the rights of their parents to make those same decisions on their own? And to begin, Mr. Khan, you are first on this question.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, I have a daughter who's in grade 10. And when it comes to parental choice, I absolutely want to know what she's being taught, who's teaching it, what's the content of that course. And as a concerned parent, I do. I have that. And I have a choice as to where she goes to school. But I'll tell you what's of even more importance, of critical importance for all of our students, is that they can gain their education in a safe, inclusive place where my daughter wouldn't be threatened, where she wouldn't be felt to be marginalized. And one of the things we saw in Red Deer at our policy convention was Mr. Kenny speaking to a motion that would pit parental rights against the safety of our children. And Mr. Kenny quite aggressively whipped up the room and pushed a motion that would endanger our students who are in gay-straight alliances who have a 5 times the rate of the tendency to suicide and endanger those children with these dangerous kinds of emotions. And I'll tell you folks, Albertans care about these issues. Albertans resonate with these issues. Albertans will not support intolerance. And that's why a centrist, progressive, conservative party is the solution in 2019. Modern conservatives understand that you can support parental rights and you can support GSAs. This doesn't have to be an either or. And we're entering this very dangerous time where we're going to be in this world where it's right wing versus left wing, and the center just doesn't have a voice.
Thank you. 2 notes. The organizers of the debate have heard from the audience. They feel that 45 seconds is more appropriate for a response on a rebuttal. I'm going to allow that, moving it from 30 seconds to 45 seconds because of the important nature of these issues. Secondly, according to the rules of this debate, when someone is mentioned in response, they have a rebuttal. So Mr. Kenny, you will have 45 seconds, and then we'll go to Mr. Nelson, who will have 90 seconds. Mr. Kenny.
Thank you. So the resolution brought forward by the Sherwood Park Constituency Association, to which Stephen refers, didn't speak to GSAs. What it said is that this party believes, as does the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, that parents should have a prior right in directing the education of their children. We reaffirm our belief in school choice, and that parents should be involved in all aspects of their education. Stephen, with respect, I don't believe it's intolerant to suggest that parents should be involved in their children's education. I think that's the long, sensible position of this party. And, you know, these are difficult and sensitive issues, and I don't think they lend themselves well to divisive political rhetoric, or for that matter, to politicians in the legislature dictating solutions that can be worked out in a sensible, safe, and compassionate way by teachers, principals, and parents working together. Why do we need politicians in the legislature dictating the relationships between parents and their kids?
Mr. Khan, I will let you respond to that, but Mr. Nelson is next, and I don't want to cut Mr. Nelson and Dr. Starkey out of this question. So we'll go to Mr. Nelson, and then we will come back to you after Mr. Nelson, and then we'll go to Mr. Nelson, then we'll go to Dr. Starkey, and we'll come back to you, Mr.
Well, these are issues that cause emotions, and sometimes emotions get in the way of good policies and good politics and good legislation. But you'd be very happy to hear that I have a video on this on my website, www.fireandfallbrother.ca. I really do, but I'm a parent of 2 school-age kids, and that's why I do have that video. It's something that's important to me. My kids are in public school in Calgary. But I want to tell you that as a parent of my children, I believe that I can be informed and should be informed about everything that my kids are going to be taught. I haven't pulled my kids out of anything ever, but I want to know that they're going to take it. I want to know if my teenage daughter is going to go through sex education, that I at least have a little bit of heads up that this is going to happen. And if I chose to pull my daughter out, which I've not done, but if I chose or wanted to for any belief ever, I should have the right to take my kid out of that. And I don't say that because I'm an extremist or anything. I just want to know that my daughter is going to come home and tell me she had sex ed. And I have a son, and that might even be worse. But I'm a guy, so I worry about the daughters. But I also believe in a parental right to choose where their children go to school and what's best for those children. And I say this I'm not disagreeing with anybody. I don't think here on this stage, I think we all have very similar ideas, but it's not out of extremist. And in what I say, and in the policy of parental ability to take someone out or be informed of what's coming to school, there has to be exceptions. I'm a lawyer, I'm in court all the time talking about exceptions. There has to be exceptions, so if a child cannot be told, or the parents cannot be told that they're gay and the parent's going to abuse them and there's a fear of that, that's an exception. Otherwise, in almost every circumstance, parents have the right.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Just to be clear, Dr. Starkey will have his 90 seconds, Mr. Khan will have 45 seconds, and Mr. Kenny will be given his full 90 seconds after that. Dr. Starkey.
Okay, I want to be very clear, and I am clear and on the record, and I have spoken in the legislature several times defending parental choice and parental rights in terms of choices in education, and we've lived that, my friends. We homeschooled both of our sons. My wife took time away from her veterinary career in order to do that, and I think they've turned out okay. One's a political scientist, so we could argue that either way. But nonetheless, I have, and I am on the record as having argued on behalf of parental choice. I defended the choice of homeschooling repeatedly. When Brian Mason said the homeschools are a fringe group, I took him on that. When David Egan defunded the wisdom homeschooling, I was the first one to take him on that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that indeed is action, not just words. Now, let's shift to GSAs and Bill 10. I voted for Bill 10. I also voted for Bill 7, which extended protection against discrimination against transgender Alberta. I am proud of that record. And ladies and gentlemen, it's absolutely true that parents ideally should be informed of every club that their child is involved in, unless it's a matter of life and death. And believe you me, sometimes it is. And in those circumstances, there must be exceptions. There must be the flexibility so that students are not put in a position whereby their lives could be jeopardized. Higher suicide rates, higher rates of homelessness amongst gay students. And that is a reality. That's not a concept, and that is something that Bill 10 and GSAs address.
Thank you, Dr. Shorten. Mr. Khan, 45 seconds, then Mr. Kenny, 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, I want to be as clear as my friend Richard Starkey. I absolutely support parental choice in terms of knowing where your son or daughter is going to school and where they actually get their education, whether that be home, a charter school, or the public school system. But what this comes down to, again, is the safety of our children. And when I told my daughter what happened at the policy conference in Red Deer, she got emotional. She said, why would people want to move us backwards? And this comes down to forward-thinking values that all Albertans share. And as I travel the province and meet in the constituency associations, this topic comes up all the time. And like Richard, I'm very proud of my work to support Bill 10. But the question comes up about Mr. Kenny. And if he's in charge, will he repeal Bill 10? This is an important question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Thank you. Mr. Kenny, you get your full 90 seconds.
Why he got that rebuttal, because he wasn't attacked, but in any event, listen, I believe one of the greatest achievements of the Progressive Conservative Party in the last 4 decades was our tradition of school choice, which gave us some of the best education outcomes, but also reflected a fundamental value inscribed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the prior right of parents to direct the education of their children. And we know this socialist government intends to undo that. We know they expressed that in their attack on wisdom homeschooling. That was repudiated by a court of law. And so I think one of the things we must do as a party is continue to stand for that value, which involves respect for parental involvement in children's education. I agree completely with both Richard and Byron that in situations where there might be abusive parents or where teachers have evidence that children could face risk, parents should not be involved. There are already protocols and laws that deal with those situations. If there are abusive or dangerous parents, they should be turned over to social services. Or the other day in Hawkwood, a lady came up to me after a function. Daughter with autism had expressed doubt about her gender in school and was put in a route of counseling, was referred to as a boy, given a boy's name by the school without ever being informed for months. Now, I don't think that's appropriate. I think that mom, how can she be treating the child one way at home and a different way at school, creating even more confusion for that child? That's not compassionate. We need to trust Alberta parents. The vast majority of them are good and loving, compassionate parents to be involved in raising their children.
Mr. Moderator, I asked Mr. Kenny a question, and I didn't
Excuse me, Mr. Khan. We'll go in the order of the way. This will be open forum now. Dr. Starkey and Mr. Nelson, would you like 45 seconds, or Dr. Starkey would like 45 seconds?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, but the question remains, and it is a critical question, that while these mechanisms may well be in place, they are not sufficient in terms of giving comfort to LGBTQ kids across our province. And if you actually talk to and you actually listen to students who are in high school or less than 25 or 30, you know, quite frankly, they can't even understand what the issue is. Absolutely. They can't even understand why we're debating this. Because LGBTQ rights is something that is fundamental. It is in our Constitution. It is in our Bill of Rights. It has been protected for years. Now, it was removed when the immigration manual for new immigrants was revised by Mr. Kenney when he was immigration minister, but nonetheless, they are a reality. And Bill 10 is a reality, and we cannot be the party that says they're going to repeal Bill 10, full stop.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Nelson, would you like 45 seconds?
Thank you. Richard and I better get in on this party here. It's said in court that bad facts make bad law. And so I think sometimes when we're dealing with such an emotionally heated issue as this, it's very easy to pick, and I use the word extreme just to mean the ends of the argument. We've heard some of the examples, and I think everybody on the stage has generally agreed to parental rights, and parental rights subject to some very limited exceptions. But I wanted to talk quickly, because I didn't talk in my main part, about Bill 10. And Bill 10 shouldn't even be an issue right now. It is an issue because as progressive conservatives, as a government, we handled it very badly. It was introduced poorly. It was a liberal motion that was put forward that we tried to usurp and had horrible law. But Bill 10, when it finally got fixed by Prentice in about March or April of 2015, was the right law.
Thank you.
Bill 10 needs to stay.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Khan, 45 seconds to you.
Well, thank you. And I think it's very clear and evident that I feel passionate about this issue and where I stand on this issue. And as Richard mentioned, where I was heartened was in Red Deer, where the young people from our PCYA showed up and spoke incredibly eloquently about why Bill 10 is so important and what it means to Albertans and is a reflection of Albertans as a modern society. So I have just one question, and it's directed to Mr. Kenney. Would you repeal Bill 10?
No.
Mr. Kenney, 45 seconds.
Sure, but could I get clarification on the rules?
Okay, so
you get more interventions the more you attack people. Is that how it works?
You mentioned Mr. Khan. To be clear, Mr. Kenney, you mentioned Mr. Khan, Mr. Nelson, and Mr. Starkey were left. Dr. Starkey were left out of the debate.
Okay.
I allowed Dr. Starkey.
I thought the rebuttal was for to respond to an attack, not to level another.
I felt it was appropriate to get Dr. Starkey and Mr. Nelson in here, else they'd be left out of the debate. So I felt it was appropriate to go around that and come back to Mr. Khan. So, Mr. Kenney, you will end this question.
Sure.
With your 45 seconds.
A couple of things. First of all, as I said, I agree with Richard and Byron that there are already protocols and laws in place to protect vulnerable children from bad situations and bad parents. But the vast majority of parents are good, compassionate parents who we should trust. And we should not have politicians dictating the resolution of extraordinarily complex and sensitive issues. I, for one, as a political leader, not prepared to tell that woman in Calgary, that mother, that she's not allowed to know what's going on in the mind of her 12-year-old autistic daughter. I don't think that's right for the daughter or the mother. And so we need some sensitivity and common sense and flexibility. Yes, of course, safety for children who might face dangerous situations, but not taking as a presumption that parents are all going to be bad parents for their children. That nothing could be further from the truth, and that mom deserves to be involved in raising her child.
Thank you. The next question has to do with a question that many members have asked the debate organizers to insert. Recently, a former MLA crossed the floor to the NDP amid allegations of harassment and bullying, and now is publicly saying the PC party is no place for women. The policy's convention investigation reported 4 additional incidents. As leader, what environment will you create within the PC party that will bring out the best in politics and create an environment that will attract the best and brightest into the party? We'll start with Mr. Nelson on this question.
Well, I heard a collective groan when you asked the question, so I don't know who exactly put this forward. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that this is something we're talking about, towards the end of January, middle January, I guess, of 2017, because to my knowledge, as a 25-year member, this awful situation has happened once, right? And I look at the campaigns of my friends, and I don't mean to plug my fellow colleagues, but they're full of women and men of the highest order. And this room is full of women and men of the highest order. And 5 generations of my family that have been in this party are, believe me, full of women and men of the highest order. So let's not sit here and hullabaloo over an awful incident, because awful incidents do happen. We appropriately responded to this as a party, and I commend Catherine O'Neill and her board for the way they dealt with an awful incident. We didn't know what to do with it. It was not tied, as far as I can tell, and I've read some reports, to any candidate. This was people in the party getting overly excited about something. Catherine and her team, I don't mean to exclude them, have brought forward a code of conduct that applies to all of us as members of this party and attendees of political function, that if we can't behave, we got to get the heck out of that event. That's the way to do it. And to be a leader of this party is to go forward and recognize that this party, the historical party, included the famous five, included the first female premier of Alberta, and has included some of the women that I look up to the most, including my mother, in this provincial history.
Thank you, Mr. Elson.